Amazon Music.
Just have a little patience. Still hurting from a love I lost. Good morning, HCC. Today we are going to be looking at the subject of patience. As I'm listening to patience, as I'm having a game of patience, patience is an essential in life. 1 second. Alexa, stop. Patience is an essential in life. If you want to become good at anything, and the skills that you have developed in your own lives have required patience. You've had to stick at something. You've had to overcome lots of challenges. You've had to invest a lot of time. That has taken patience. If you want to overcome challenges in your life and produce meaningful pieces of work, that's going to take patience. Albert Einstein said, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stick with the problems longer. But I think he was quite smart as well, wasn't he? Patience is absolutely essential for the relationships that we form. If you want deep and real relationships, it's going to take a lot of patience. And it is an absolute must in our walk with God and the development of our faith. Patience is an absolute essential in life. But what is patience? One person described patience as what we love in the driver behind us, but we scorn in the driver in front of us. Another person said patience is the ability not just to wait, but to wait with the right attitude. Another definition says it is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble or suffering without getting angry or upset. I wonder what you are like at that. What are you like at waiting and tolerating delay without getting angry or upset? What areas in your life do you have incredible patience in, and what really brings out your impatient side? Talk about it with the people next to you, or put it on the chat if you're watching online. You have just a minute to discuss this.
So Bobby, you're patient when?
I'm patient with my little grandchildren, whatever they want to do, whether it's the tiny twins dropping their food in my hair, or whether it's Carrick just wanting a cuddle, or wanting to do one more thing, Grandma, please. I am very patient then.
So surprisingly, I can be very patient in a traffic jam because there's nothing I can do about it, so I may as well just sit there and wait it out and be grateful that I'm not the one causing the traffic jam.
When I'm sorted and when I'm ready to go and I know what's expected of me.
I've got plenty of patience for things that I enjoy doing, like gardening, like waiting to see the seeds coming through.
I find it easy to be patient when I'm really concerned about something.
I find it easier to be patient with someone when I really take the time to understand where they're coming from.
I get really impatient at traffic lights at roadworks when they just let 4 or 5 cars through and you're in a long queue, and then you have to get to the traffic lights and you can't get through, it changes colour.
When Bobby has to sort out her handbag and we're ready to go out, I've got the keys in my hand, the front door's open, and the handbag needs to be filled up with combs and bug cream and scarves and all sorts of things, paraphernalia that women carry in their handbags.
Great.
Well, I sometimes find it very hard to be patient when things don't go my way.
I find it hard to be patient for something when I'm really looking forward to what's coming.
I don't have a lot of patience with people. Should I admit that? So other people's letting me down. Yeah, other people letting me down when I think they shouldn't do. Don't have patience for that.
Oh, having just done 2 trips down to Devon, my impatience comes to the fore when we're down these Devon lanes and there's a car coming towards us and John pulls over and stops, and as the car comes past, he keeps creeping forward further and further, and I put both feet on the brakes and I think, John, stop. Oh, I'm so impatient then.
Some great examples of patience there, and impatience. I wonder what makes you impatient. Just this morning, as I was planning to do this talk and record, I had to take my car to the garage, and it's okay because it's only a 5-minute journey, and yet I didn't know about the traffic lights. Not just any traffic lights, the traffic lights that were put just before a junction, so it was even slower, and just sat there in traffic. And that is something that winds me up. I had a time scale, I had an expectation that I would be starting recording at this moment. It's something I wanted to get going on, and yeah, there was a delay. It wasn't expected. I went through a quiet village. Surely there's going to be no issues there, and yet traffic, jam, waiting, frustration starts to build. Impatience starts to show itself. Or how about when you're in a supermarket and you're lining up and you're in a long queue, but then the next aisle open to you opens up, and aisle number 3 is now open, and you dart and you're second in the queue and you're looking and you've dodged a bullet because it's such a long queue. But then the person in front of you pulls out their shopping vouchers, and it's not just one shopping voucher, it's a whole wad, pretty much a voucher for every item in their basket, which they're going through one by one in a very methodical and slow manner. And you're watching this long queue dissolve as you are waiting and waiting and waiting with somewhere to be. Have you felt that? Or perhaps you're on a motorway and you're trying to choose which lane to be in. And you're thinking, right, okay, this is this lane, and then the other lane starts to move, and it keeps moving. And the driver in front of you dodges into that lane, and you watch his car disappear. Chosen the wrong lane again. I should have been in that lane. But then the smug feeling as that lane stops and your lane starts and you overtake that driver. Have you been there? Normally if there's a blockage on the motorway, I'm straight away saying to Helen, because of my impatience, Helen, what's the next slip road? Let's take a detour. And we end up taking a detour which takes us far longer than how we waited on the motorway. Patience is so hard. It's something that we probably all would like more of. And yet, in our current climate, in our lockdown moment, we have all had to tolerate delays, unexpected changes, restrictions to our personal freedoms in a way that we haven't had to for years. Perhaps we as a nation have had a lesson in patience. Perhaps that's one of the outcomes of this time, this difficult time that we've all faced, is that we've actually learned to understand a bit more about patience and tolerating unexpected delays. But then again, we've all also experienced probably the impatience in our relationships, as we've all had to work on top of one another and live and work in the same buildings and try and find pockets of space to get on with our lives. And the relationships have been very claustrophobic, and we've had to spend a lot more time intensely with each other than we have had to previously. Has that revealed impatience in our relationships and our struggle to tolerate and cope and be thoughtful to one another? If we're honest, it probably has. But as a society, patience is needed. Could we describe ourselves as a patient society? The word patience is used less now in our common language than at any time in the last 500 years. And someone said, well, that's a commentary on our own ability to have patience as a society, as a Western civilization. But it's not a surprise, I guess, because we no longer have to wait for hardly anything. You no longer have to wait till next week for your favourite programme on TV. You can watch the whole series, binge watch it in a day. Amazon, I can have something arrive the next time. Internet, I can have the knowledge, as long as I don't get that annoying little circle going round and round, I can have the knowledge straight away at my fingertips. Everything seems to be instant. I found just how little patience I had the other day when I was frustrated that I had to wait for instant oats in the microwave because it was going to take 2 minutes to get my porridge. I thought, wow, that's not showing great patience, Rich. But we have everything at our fingertips. Our expectations are met quickly. So how do we then carry that over to our faith, where we're going to see that patience is an absolute essential, that God doesn't operate in our time scale when we want things to happen, that perhaps we're used to having in the lives that we have at the minute, more so than ever in human history. What does that mean for our faith? So I want patience. I need patience immediately. I have to have patience now. And yet patience doesn't work like that. The fruits of the Spirit don't just given, they're gifts, but they grow within us slowly. In fact, so much about our Christian experience is about waiting on God. Fruit, I love an apple. It's a nice, hot, summer's day. A nice, fresh apple would be great. But unfortunately, my apple tree is not quite there yet. It started, you can see the little buds growing, but they're not there yet. There's still a long way to go. Probably like the patience that we have. And God gives us this gift of patience. His Spirit is within us. We all have the capacity for these things. And yet, we too need to lean forward and let God do His work within us. And how is God going to teach us patience? By getting us to practice patience. At this point, do not look at the person next to you as if they are God's tool for patience in your life. That will not go well, okay? God is a patient God. We experience God's grace and patience time and time again in our lives. Jesus demonstrated patience and showing us what it means to be full and alive in our emotions on earth. How actually I love the fact that Jesus got angry about the right things to get angry about in the right ways. He showed love and compassion to those around him. He didn't mind whether his agenda and his goal was interrupted by those around him. He had time. Why? Because he submitted to the plans of his Father. And so much about our Christian experience and patience is about realizing that we are not in the driving seat of our lives. That when we truly submit and follow God, it is Him who sets the agenda. It is Him who sets the goals. It is Him who sets the plans. And when we realize that, there's going to be a lot less frustration, confusion, and anger against God. There are going to be times in our lives, and perhaps you are facing it now, where you haven't got a clue what God is doing, and you're crying out to Him. And a passage which is really going to help us to understand a bit more about patience that we're going to look at today is James 5. Let's go there now. James 5, starting at verse 7. He says, "Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Now, one thing that we can quickly observe about that passage, it says, starting in verse 7, "Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming." There is such a perspective about our waiting and God's coming. God coming again. And we are living in what theologians would call the middle. We are living and waiting in the middle. We are living between the already and the not yet. Jesus has already died for us. Jesus has already paid for our sin. Jesus has given us his Spirit. Jesus has given us his word. Jesus has already come. And yet, we are well aware that we live in a world where there is still sin. There are still struggles. There are still illnesses and sicknesses. We still live in bodies which crave things that we shouldn't want, that aren't good for us. We are well aware that Jesus has not yet come again and fulfilled. Because we live in the already but the not yet, but we have a promise that Jesus is coming again, that he will fulfill all his promises, that he will make all things new, that he will completely defeat sin, that he will restore the creation. The whole world, it says, is groaning in anticipation of Jesus coming again. We have an eternal hope. Now, for this next illustration, I need my dog. Never work with animals or children. It requires too much patience. My dog has disappeared hunting. She is quite a hunter. Let me just go and get her. Now, Daisy, I want you to meet Daisy. Daisy is a hunter. Look at that face. You can just see it. She is a deadly hunter. I wouldn't say deadly. She loves hunting, and when we were on the farm, back when she was just a little girl, she actually caught a mouse when I was cleaning out one of the bins. She caught it and she stuck both feet on it, and I thought, oh, the hunter has come. The hunter is here. And then she licked this mouse. She licked it and licked it and licked it, and this very wet mouse shook itself and ran off. So Daisy likes to hunt. She doesn't quite have the killer instinct. But we live in a garden where there's squirrels, and Daisy loves the squirrels. In fact, this tree behind us, she will often chase the squirrel to the tree. She then waits at the bottom of this tree, looking upwards, staring up, and she will be like that for hours. If you are on looking at this, you will see the squirrel run up the tree, you will see Daisy run to the tree, she will watch the squirrel go up the tree, but what she doesn't see is the squirrel jumps from that tree to that tree to that tree to that tree to that tree and disappears. She doesn't see that, she just stares upwards, waiting for the squirrel to come down. But the squirrel has gone. We need to live with a perspective that there isn't an empty hope in the future, but this eternal reality is real. And I really struggle with that, because I think sometimes we live in the middle, and the middle is hard. They say when you have a vision or an idea, the middle is the hardest place to live. At the beginning, everything is real and fresh and exciting, and you know why it's all coming, and you get that vibe from the writers. The coming of the Lord is near. It is all fresh, and they've seen Jesus, and they've this incredible miracle, and the reality is present. When you get towards the end, it is tangible. You can see the finish line. It's like that is what we're working towards. I can see it now, but the middle, they say in the middle, you forget the reasons at the start and you can't see the finish line at the end, and you begin to lose your focus. And that's often how I feel about having an eternal hope. I live so much in the present that I don't let the eternal reality affect my perspective, give me the sense of urgency that I need. Run in such a way as to win the prize, Hebrews 12:2 says. This eternal reality that this life is just a fraction of my life and future, of a relationship with a good God, of an eternal relationship, a hope which is a very real reality in our Christian hope and experience. I fail to let that dig in and shape my own perspective. I fail to let that sense of urgency and that truth become a living reality that I want to share with others, because I just think about the here and now and I forget about the eternal hope. And we are to wait in this life, in this world, in our struggles, because Jesus says this is going to be hard living on earth. I am with you, he says, but we still live in a fallen world with everything that means, all the struggles that entails. Jesus is with us, and he tells us to wait patiently because there is a hope. There is a restoration coming, an eternal hope. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop. You know, sometimes the hardest time it is for a farmer or for a gardener is when you've planted a seed and you've planted it, and these seeds I've noticed, not that this garden is mine, this is my mother's garden, but these seeds have been planted, they've been in warm windowsill, they've been moist for like well over a week, and yet there is nothing happening. Now you can easily start to get impatient, and maybe you've planted something and you start to get a bit concerned about this, and you start prodding and digging and getting a bit anxious. And yet a farmer is patient because he knows that although he can't see anything, when the seed has been planted in the right conditions, radical change is going on. And in our lives, perhaps we are going through something and it doesn't seem that God is present. And this is a hard time for us, and we just do not see any sign that God is doing anything. We've committed our plans to God, we're looking to serve him in the places he's placed us, but it is hard, and we've committed it to prayer and we're seeking God, and yet there doesn't seem to be anything going on. Well, take a lesson from the farmer, because the farmer knows that radical change is going on under the surface, that work is happening, that shoots are forming, that transformation is going on, and it is the same in our lives. In our waiting, God is working. Zach Poonen says, waiting is not just about what will happen at the end, but it is also about what you are becoming while you are waiting. God says in Romans 8, in all things God works for the good of those who live according to his purpose. When we are seeking God and putting him first, we have a promise that in everything, in the good things and in the bad things, God says he will bring out good. God is working, God is transforming. Perhaps one of our prayers needs to be not just God take me out of this, but God teach me and use me in this. God, do your work. James 1 says, let patience have its work within you. God's masterpiece is you. He is working in you to transform you and grow you to be full and complete in him. Let patience have its work. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. It's been a hot week this week, and those of you with gardens will have been watering your plants and your gardens. And my mum is a keen gardener, as we've established, and she's left subtle hints like watering cans placed strategically around this garden in key places, so I can keep these plants all alive, the potted plants. But as a farmer, you have no control over the weather. And all you can do, once you've planted your crop, is wait expectantly for the rain. Now, this spring was a really dry spring, and some farmers around here didn't get their crops in at the winter, and if you don't get your winter crop in, you've got a second chance, you can get a spring crop in. And they got there, they planted in the spring, and then, I don't know if you remember, but it was dry. There was no rain for ages, and the seed just sat there. And I met a local farmer, a farmer in his late 80s. And I was like, oh, it's a dry spring, you know, your crop, not much is growing. And we were standing next to his field, and he looked at it, and it wasn't growing. It was like he drilled it, and it was just sitting there. But he goes, do you know what, Richard? I've been farming nearly, 80 years on this farm, and there's always been a harvest. And there was that peace about him that there was nothing he could do about rain for this crop. It's the last chance he had to grow a crop in this field this year. It's his livelihood. It's how he makes his living. But there was nothing he could do by worrying about it. It was out of his hands. But he was an old, wise farmer who knew that he'd always had a harvest. He'd seen many seasons come and go. I remember when we were farming and it was a really dry spring, and I was surprised that my dad and my uncle who I farmed with weren't more anxious because nothing was growing. It seemed that all our planting was just dying. Yet there was a kind of a peace about them that they've seen this before. They've survived this before. They've gone through it before. And so it is with some Christians, some mature Christians that we have. They can go through very tough experiences, and yet they still have the assurance and the peace that God is with them, that God has not left them, that there is hope. And it says in the Bible, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Stephen last week spoke about the peace we can have when we simply yield our life to God and trust him. My sister's got a dog, and she's taken it to dog training because it's got a few anger management issues. Our dogs are also not brilliantly behaved, so she's doing better than us probably. But when all the dogs are together, we have a footpath across the end of our garden, and you'll hear the dogs just erupt in a cacophony of barking and growling, and they charge off, shortly followed probably by my sister's voice, and she says, "I've got it, I've got it." And it's a command she's giving to her dog, in other words to say, you don't need to worry about this, I have it. This is safe. You don't need to protect this footpath, I've got it. And it's starting to work with the training. In the same way, we need to trust in a God who has this. There's a Bible verse which says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. He will direct your paths. God has it. It's in his hands. What better place to place our lives than a God who is all loving and all knowing? What better place can our lives be than in his hands? He's got this. Thank goodness, when I look at my life, and there were times where I had crushing disappointment, where I wasn't accepted into a college, and surely that was the last chance I had. My time was going by. It was really important that I got accepted into that place, and I wasn't. Thank goodness that there was a relationship that I hung my hopes on, and it didn't work out, because God had better plans for my life. In his hands, there's no better place. God says to us, I've got this. So as we continue in our garden tour and in this passage of James, we come to verse 8, which says, you too be patient and stand firm, and urging to stand firm. Because actually when we are going through trials, when we are going through tough times, when we are going through times where it seems that God is not hearing us and is not present, and what are you doing? The unseen work that God is often doing in our lives. The roadmap which we don't understand, it's very easy to get wobbly in our faith. Our faith is under a test. We have been shown the weaknesses that we have. Recently, we have been chopping a lot of wood. Let me just show you. So behind me, somewhere, are wood piles. I had the bright idea this year to make little wood round houses. I thought it looked a little bit nicer, and we had a lot of wood to chop up. And as the tower got taller, I was throwing wood up to my wife so she could stack it. And this was like a giant piece of Jenga, and it was getting wobblier and wobblier as the tower got taller. As we are going through difficult times, we need to stand firm because we are weak. We are tested. We are. That is when doubts come in, isn't it? When we can't see what God is doing. It reminds me of the passage in Ephesians which says, finally, brothers, stand firm, be strong in the Lord, put on the armour of God, do everything that you can do to stand, and the importance of putting on God's protection on our lives. And we have this vibe here in James, stand firm. God, what are you doing in my life? God, why haven't you heard my prayers? God, are you even there? God, why are you not giving me this thing which is good? Why are you not giving me the relationship that I long for? Why are you not hearing our prayers about having a baby? Why have I not got a good outcome to this illness that I'm battling? When will this end? God, hear our prayers. So many of the Psalms are cries to God, aren't they? God, where are you? Hear our prayers. And these are the times where James is saying, stand firm, be strong, watch out, because the devil is prowling like a lion. He is there. He is wanting to catch us out and stumble. He is wanting to attack us and in our weakest moments. Be strong and stand firm. Find your security in God's truth, not in your circumstances. Dig those roots down. I remember teaching on the Ephesians 6, and we talked about the shield of faith to extinguish the flaming arrows of the evil one. And I spoke about how those shields would lock together in those times, that picture of a community coming together of the faith. But so the flaming arrows in a city, when they're attacking a city, the enemy would put flaming arrows, create little fires behind their defences that would cause chaos and disruption. And notice what James is saying now. Do not grumble against each other. Do not turn on each other. Do not speak ill of each other. Firstly, when we have a sense of grumbling in our lives, no matter what we're grumbling about, who are we grumbling to? We're grumbling about the person in charge. So if God has placed us in a situation, God has placed difficult people around us, and we are moaning about them, who are we moaning about really? We are moaning about God. He is sovereign, He is control when we've given our lives to Him. So our moaning actually is very deeply theologically against God. And rather, we need to be thankful. It talks a lot about 1 Thessalonians, be thankful, rejoice. Be thankful to God and what He's doing. Even in the tough times, we can still thank God for who He is and what He's wanting to do in and through us. So firstly, our grumbling is a sign actually that we are not waiting well. But secondly, patience is connected to love. 1 Corinthians 13, what does it say? Love is patient. And this is the time where we really need to, in our congregations, in our families, in our communities, don't grumble against one another, but love is patient. When we make these wood piles, they're quite hard to make them in a way that binds together. It reminds me of that passage in Ephesians where it talks about how one of the examples of a church given is that God is built on the foundations of the apostles and prophets. He's building us up as living stones to be a temple in which He lives by His Spirit. Now down here you can see that there's one of these log piles starting to come together, and these logs are all of different shapes and sizes. Some are knobbly, some are round. And yet if I don't build these in a certain way, these piles, they just fall down. And so it is with us. Patience is worked out in community. So much of our impatience happens in relationships, doesn't it? And we have to be so patient with one another in our churches and families and relationships because we are so very different. May we be a church where God is building us together, a holy temple, built on Christ Jesus as the chief cornerstone. May we be a church which are known for our loving relationships, our caring relationships. Paul seems to know how hard this is, and it's not easy. In Ephesians he says, Ephesians 4 verse 2, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another. Sometimes we just need to bear with one another in love. And then he says make every effort, not just try hard, but make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. It's so important that we always look to foster and protect ourselves as a church by patient, loving relationships filled with His Spirit, not reacting to our own selfish pride or affronts or sensitivities. And lastly then, if you are struggling with patience, if you're finding it hard to wait, be encouraged, because you're not alone. You're in good company. He says in verse 10, "Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord." The Bible is full of characters who waited and struggled, were obviously frustrated at times as well. Abraham waiting for his son, Noah spending years building a boat, David promised and anointed as king only to run from Saul for years, Joseph, whose life seemed to be a catastrophe of disasters, and yet God was behind it all. Take courage. So many of the Bible prophets and characters waited on God for years, as we're commanded to do too. Who are we trusting? Who are we looking to? Who is our guide? Who has the overall plan for our lives? It is God. I close with a story about my brother-in-law. It was after we were not long after we were married. Myself and my wife Helen went on a couple of days break with my sister Helen and her husband Dave that you know in church. Now we were really excited about going to a nice pub for a meal, and Dave got his OS map out and he knew a route. And I remember it quite clearly. My wife looked beautiful and in a lovely dress and lovely sandals and put her makeup on, and we set out for what should only be a half an hour, 40-minute walk. Well, the path became a trail. The trail narrowed into this narrow track. The track soon disappeared into a rather wet, indistinct path. The path was getting wetter and wetter. We were heading in the right direction for sure, but the squelchiness was starting to seep through these beautiful sandals that my wife was wearing, and we started to doubt whether Dave knew what he was doing or the route would get us where we wanted to go, particularly when it seemed like on all sides there was water. But we were heartened by the fact that in the distance we could see the lights of the pub that we were going to, and we kept going with our eyes fixed on this pub until we realised we could go no further, because on all three sides, except from the place where we came from, was water. And about half a kilometre over this water was the pub where we were going. And Dave was analysing his map, slightly confused. We realised that our reservation time had gone. We were not going to make the meal. I think patience was running thin by some in the party. And you know what? I wish I could say this was an isolated incident, but Dave has become a little bit renowned for his OS maps and routes of adventure. And I've realised that actually, now I enjoy biking and running and going on routes with Dave, that actually we don't always know where we're going. We think we do, but I've realised now that my expectation of joining Dave in one of his adventures is the adventure is the journey. And it's so fantastic exploring new paths and places. And actually my expectations of where I think we need to arrive at, I need to let go at a little bit. So it is in our journey with God. The adventure is the journey with God as He knows the routes and plans for us. As He knows the detours that for us don't make sense. The pauses and stops along the way where we might meet certain people or minister to certain people or have time for people that we hadn't planned for. The times where the path just seems to end to end in a dead end, and we think, what was that about? And yet in God's plans and purposes, it all makes sense. I'm so pleased that I can trust my life in the hands of a God who knows what He's doing with my life. And there are times where I look at my life and I just have to trust in Him. Patience is essential for faith. And I hope that we've been challenged by this today as we look to develop patience in our faith, in our lives, and in our relationships. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Richard. Lovely morning we've had together. If you want to join us in person next week, we'll be down for the watch party at 83A. Otherwise, join us again online. Have a blessed week and be a blessing to those you meet. Bye.